Welcome to the absolute nadir of J.R. Ewing's professional life, so far. And honestly, I've never loved him more. We are 9 episodes into Season 5, and the chickens haven't just come home to roost. They've moved in, changed the locks, and started foreclosure proceedings. Last week, Miss Ellie executed the split herd round the world, stripping J.R. of his absolute monarchy over Ewing Oil. But the real kicker? J.R.'s former mistress, Afton Cooper, hooked up J.R.'s mortal foes, Cliff Barnes and Vaughn Leland. For the first time since the series began, Cliff actually has J.R. by the throat. And the air is getting thin. We open with Gary returning to South Fork and dropping some exposition about what's going on with the family. This is where it would have been really good for Gary to talk about what's going on at Knott's Landing, since, that's the junior show. Even the boom mic guy doesn't care what Gary has to say. Gary and JR catch up. Gary wonders how Jock feels about Sue Ellen running off with John Ross, and notes that when Valine took off with Lucy, JR managed to get her back. But he seems to be struggling with his own kid. JR lays out the offer. Gary should give him his 10 voting shares in exchange for JR setting him up with his own business out in California. Besides, argues JR, for a man who crumbles under pressure like Gary, those 10 voting shares are a curse, not a blessing. At the offices of Senator Bobby calls the California lawyer and wants to know why the firm was sending Kristen Shepard $2,000 a month. The lawyer clams up in a hurry when Bobby starts questioning him.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
JR, who is starting to feel the pressure, calls in Billy Bob McCoy, oil broker extraordinaire. McCoy lowballs him at $31 a barrel. That's a $20 million loss if JR agrees to it. JR thinks the price will go up soon, but McCoy has him over a barrel, so to speak. That's not all, though. The lease on the oil tanks that JR has been storing all that oil in is coming due, and he's getting pressure to renew or take his oil and go home. At Wentworth Tool and Die, Cliff Barnes and Vaughn Leland invite surviving members of the oil cartel, sans Merrily Stone, to conspire against JR. In short, since the Dallas banks will be aching to dump the liability from JR's note, they want the cartel to buy that bank note. That way they either get a 12% windfall from the interest, or JR defaults and they own a large chunk of Ewing Oil. Unsuccessful on his own, Bobby enlists Phyllis to find out the connection between Ewing Oil and that California law firm. At pre-dinner cocktails, Gary announces that, at JR's suggestion, he's turning his voting shares over to a proxy, his daughter Lucy Ewing. This results in 9, count them 9, reaction shots from the room. Now that's a great soapy twist, because JR just got hoist on his own petard. And the direction certainly makes you feel it. Ewing Oil, Martin Porter of the Cattleman's Bank, the guy who was processing Ray Krebbs' loan, tells JR that the bank thinks that Ray is too high risk, but he will be willing to approve the loan if JR and Ewing Oil back it up with collateral. For an institution that requires a 4-digit PIN, facial recognition cameras, and a 6-foot buffer radius at an ATM just to withdraw $40 from your own account to buy weed, this seems a little lax with the security procedures. Anyway, JR now knows that Ray is in trouble, much like a shark hearing the sound waves from a thrashing school of helpless fish. JR asks Porter to delay the decision a few days, which he agrees to. At the Southern Cross, the bizarre nightly ritual of Dusty Farlow watching his old rodeo clips, which frankly just consist of shots from the rodeo episode of this show, while Sue Ellen hovers over him, continues unabated. Dude, at least give her a chair. At Brooktree, Dr. Conrad says Pam can go home for a few days because she's making such great progress. When they're alone, Conrad tells Bobby that Pam needs some homespun normalcy, and he should be honest with her about the baby situation. Would it surprise you to learn that Bobby winds up doing something extremely abnormal and dishonest? Ray returns from dropping Donna off at the airport to find JR making himself at home. JR gleefully reveals that he's stalling Ray's banknote, but he'd be willing to back it with collateral if Ray gives up his shares.
Or you could let the whole thing just collapse by itself. I don't think anybody'd be surprised to see you fall on your face.
Ray, who is desperate, asks for a few days to think things over. At the Southern Cross, the seed that JR planted in Dusty last episode is finally showing some sprouts, as Dusty goes off on Sue Ellen about going to San Angelo by herself. He says that the men are always looking at her and fantasizing about her, and he'll never be able to give her what they can. Sue Ellen, who has developed the patience of a saint through her marriage to JR, assures him that she doesn't care about any of that. He finally just admits that not only does he not feel like a man, he doesn't feel like he's alive. It's really interesting how they're dealing with the parallel themes of disabilities in this show, making the characters feel like they're not fully alive or human. Pamela can't have kids, so she feels the pull into the void. And Dusty can't have sex, so he feels dead inside. This is a really good stopping point to talk about how gender roles are sort of a language unto themselves. Gender is a thing you feel internally that has both biological and psychological drivers. But it's also a social signal to those around you about how well you fit into expectations. In early 1980s America, where we were seeing a big pushback against I am woman, hear me roar feminism and Roe v. Wade, having kids communicated that you were everything we expect a young woman to be and to become, a wife and mother. Conversely, part of the language of manhood, besides embracing danger and using force to solve personal problems, was satisfying a woman. But not just satisfying a woman, making her obsessed with how satisfied she was and how empty she feels without that satisfaction. So for both Pam and Dusty, their disabilities are like a person having a stroke or suffering a brain injury that causes Broca's aphasia. You have the desire and the recognition, but you can't access the language. Pam wants to be a mother to communicate how her mother failed at being a woman. Dusty wants to satisfy Sue Ellen to communicate that he's not a failure as a man. Neither one can access the parts of themselves necessary to communicate that, though. Unless you think I'm reading too many esoteric gender studies textbooks, Dusty turns to the camera and says as much before hopping on his horse to prove that he's still got it.
I can't be a man in the bedroom. At least I can be a man in the saddle.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
Despite all the pressure, JR is still full of sass.
Mr. Ewing, there's a Mr. Cliff Barnes here to see you.
Who?
Cliff shows up to gloat. All of JR's frenemies have teamed up to buy his note. Cliff says that he's going to get rid of JR's tacky furniture once he takes over. And then he stops by the next day to offer an extension in exchange for getting Ewing 6 back under Barnes' control.
That loan is due in 3 days. You're a dead man, JR, and I'm the head pallbearer.
At Dr. Waring's practice, Mitch finds that he's not doing nearly as much altruistic work as he was promised. In fact, he's mostly babysitting nervous mothers while their daughters come in for nose jobs. That's the exact thing he didn't want. As if things couldn't get worse for JR, Ray Krebbs tells him no dice on that loan deal. Ray decides that he's in a much better position if he and Lucy and Ellie, using John Ross's shares, get together and push JR out at the slightest hint of malfeasance. Desperate, JR decides to take Billy Bob McCoy up on his deal. Unfortunately, though, McCoy's deal is now off the table. No one is buying oil. Well, there is one guy in San Angelo who might be desperate enough to buy. Goes by the name of Farlow. Phyllis, the amazing administrative assistant, finds a letter from JR to the California lawyer setting up the payments to Kristen. And now Bobby knows who the real father is. Or so he thinks. At the Southern Cross, Clayton tells Sue Ellen that Dusty needs to feel like himself again, and that's something she can't help with. Sue Ellen says she feels Dusty slipping away from her. At lunch, Shear tells Ray to face facts. Either he has to admit to Donna that he needs help, ask the Ewings for money, or sell his share of the project for a big loss. Always living in his brother's shadow, Bobby also has a big meeting at a sports venue. But unlike the Cotton Bowl, which played host to the dominant SMU Mustangs, Reunion Arena was not seeing a whole lot of good use. In fact, the Mavericks only had 5 more wins than the Mustangs did that year. Faraday says he's clearing out, since the well is running dry. Bobby says he's willing to buy the boy from him and send Faraday on a one-way trip back to California. The price? $25,000, or roughly 1 year's worth of Christian Shepherd bribe money. After Faraday leaves, Bobby gives us one of those famous TV soliloquies about how JR is in for the surprise of a lifetime. And another finger on the monkey's paw curls. Finally, with his tail between his legs, JR approaches Cliff Barnes and asks for that 10-day extension.
After all these years, I finally whipped J.R. Ewing.
Cliff does an evil cackle, and we're out. Watching this episode is like watching a man slowly get engulfed in quicksand. It just keeps piling on as he sinks further and further down. Usually that someone is Cliff Barnes, and it's a random Friday. But this time it's JR, who is a victim of his own tendency towards power plays. Thinking back to that "who" quip, it's not just a funny line, it's JR's psychological defense mechanism. By refusing to acknowledge Cliff Barnes as a legitimate entity, JR maintains his internal hierarchy even as his external world collapses. It's very much an insider flex. Even when Cliff holds the note to his very life, JR refuses to grant him the dignity of being a rival. To JR, Cliff Barnes, even in victory, is, and will always be, that loser from the wrong side of the tracks. The contrast between the two brothers in this episode is staggering. Bobby is descending into a world of crime and blackmail to hold JR accountable, while JR is descending into financial ruin chasing that sunk cost. Patrick Duffy is the main driver of two storylines at this point: Pamela's return home and Kristen Shepard's baby. He does an excellent job at both, one from a position of weakness and one from a position of strength. Little does Bobby know that those two problems in his life are about to be connected real soon. Meanwhile, JR's best Ray Krebbs dig, mocking Ray for driving Donna's car, is a brilliant callback to the show's obsession with class and masculinity. JR knows that for a man like Ray, being kept by a woman is a fate worse than death. And we see that parallel with Dusty Farlow. It all shows that, even in his darkest hour, JR knows exactly where to find the chinks in everyone's armor. Behind the scenes, this episode really showcases Irving J. Moore's talent for making office scenes feel like a Western. The way he frames the confrontation between Cliff and JR in the finale, with Cliff sitting behind his desk like an old-timey judge, is a complete reversal of the show's usual power dynamic. And JR both refusing to sit down and insisting on using his own pen to sign is a nice touch. Production-wise, the lighting in JR's office becomes progressively darker throughout the episode, mirroring his shrinking options. By the time we get to the nighttime finale, he's practically shrouded in shadow, making it both literally and metaphorically darkest before the dawn. Assuming the dawn gets here in time. It's a visually stunning way to show the shift in the Dallas universe. We are witnessing the death of an era, and the birth of a very dangerous, very empowered Cliff Barnes.